Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dursey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of APA and Chair-elect of the New Urbanism Division, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Wednesday, November 18th, and we will hear the presentation, Best Practices for Production of Guidelines and Plans. For technical help during today's webcast, type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call the 1-800 number shown on your screen in bold. For content questions related to the presentation, type those in the questions box also located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up on your screen is a list of the sponsoring chapters and divisions. Thanks to all the participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to their members. Today's webcast is sponsored by the Urban Design and Preservation Division. To learn more about all our divisions, visit planning.org/divisions. To learn about our chapters, planning.org/chapters. On your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts. This is the rest of our webcasts for 2015. To register for these webcasts, just visit our webcast webpage at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, visit planning.org and navigate to your dashboard. At the top of the page, select Activities by Provider. That's the easiest way to do this. And then type in today's sponsor, Urban Design and Preservation Division, and then you can select today's session. This webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. Some recorded webcasts are available for distance education CM credit. For availability of our distance education credits, check again the webcast webpage at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our sessions. And we are recording today's webcast. It will be available on our YouTube channel. Just head over to youtube.com/planningwebcast, or you can just type in search Planning Webcast on YouTube. And a PDF of the presentation will also be available on our webcast webpage. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca Leonard, who is the chair of the Urban Design and Preservation Division. She's going to introduce today's session, the division, and today's speaker. So Rebecca,
great.
I'm going to turn that over to you.
Okay, great, wonderful. Well, thank you. As chair of the Urban Design and Preservation Division, I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar. The division's a nationwide community of professionals dedicated to supporting educational and networking opportunities for planners, urban designers, preservationists, and other allied professionals. Our members are uniquely concerned with the built environment, particularly urban design, historic preservation, and the legacy of the planning profession. We offer great opportunities to promote these topics within the field of planning and within APA. If you find these topics of value and interest, and you may have an interest in working with us as in our division, so please consider volunteering or assisting in other division activities. We invite you to join. You can go to our webpage under the planning.org website. My day job is president of Design Workshop. We were founded in 1969. Design Workshop's been recognized with many awards over the years in community planning, urban and mixed-use centers, public parks, and private gardens. We're very transparent with our business systems and standards, believing in the advancement of the professions of planning, urban design, and landscape architecture. So I asked one of my fellow principals here at Design Workshop to help with this webinar. So I'd like to introduce Stephanie Grigsby. She's a certified planner and a professional landscape architect. She's also a principal in our firm's Tahoe office. Several years ago, motivated by frustrations experienced in the process of pulling together a planning document, such as technical difficulties, cumbersome review processes, delays, and cost overruns, She led a small army of employees here at Design Workshop in the creation of a project book best practices document. And we thought this is something that the planners at APA would also be interested in learning from. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Grigsby.
Thank you, Rebecca. As Rebecca said, we recently put together our best practices for producing plans, guidelines for documents, because these are really complex efforts, and we really appreciate the opportunity that APA has presented for us to share them on a larger scale. And we're really hopeful, as Rebecca said, that in terms of shared learning, that we can spur a larger conversation of best practices among us as professionals, so that we can really focus on delving into content and making content richer and more meaningful to our communities and regions, and be less focused on the process itself, but really about the content that is derived out of these processes. And although I'll be presenting today somewhat from a private sector perspective, some of my language might refer to clients and so forth, but I think that the best practices and the processes and tools that we have developed really cross those boundaries and could really be applied both in private and public sectors. So getting started, as we delved into sort of understanding the types of documents and efforts that we produce as part of our profession, we were able to sort of categorize them into 4 main categories. We have academic documents, technical, visioning, and marketing are really our primary products that we produce as planners and designers. The academic documents are more the peer-reviewed journals. They have clear description of research methodology with hypotheses and transparent assumptions and really clear outcomes. The technical documents, I think, are where the majority of us spend our time. These types of documents convey large amounts of information, and the challenge is really providing that information in a very concise and a transparent manner. They can include master plans, guidelines, strategic plans, corridor plans, and a number of other different tools and opportunities for people to provide documents for their communities. There's visioning documents, which are more persuasive in nature. Typically for us, they are a little bit more illustrative and describe the future conditions a little bit more qualitatively, and are really, we found them useful in order to be able to communicate ideas to stakeholders and funding partners. And then there's also marketing materials, which are more promotional in nature. But as a whole, all of the types of documents really are complex efforts, and we found that they really require a high level of coordination between different entities to both generate and iterate the content, to really deliver a high-quality product without errors, and to be able to secure all the approvals so that we can finalize it. And being able to work through that process is really a challenge in some instances. And so by creating and following a strict process, we've been able to understand how we can streamline that a little bit more. And there's a number of challenges, I think, that face us as we develop these types of documents. Some are related to scope creep. Some can be the parameters for editing and stakeholder review cycles that can occur. And then there's also sort of a general lack of industry standard for some of the document types. So being able to understand what the expectation is really important. As Rebecca mentioned, Design Workshop has developed a real legacy, what we call the legacy design process, when we approach our designs and planning projects. And it is a rigorous pursuit, really, of a comprehensive, transparent, and iterative planning and design process. And this method diagram was developed to help remind teams that we build from the issues that are initiated early on in the process, that we have information that is brought to us by a broad group of stakeholders, and that we really want to hold ourselves accountable at the end through proof and measurement to make sure that we have addressed and resolved those issues. As part of this process, we've also found that our approach really results in research efforts that determine baselines, benchmarks, compare alternatives in order to be able to prove the success of those planning strategies. So the impetus to really develop this best practices manual initiated from this fact that we have continual layers of complexity in our projects, which can bring more attention from both clients and academic audiences, as well as stakeholders in the general public. So being able to have a detailed project documentation effort really needs to be able to communicate both the project processes and results in a very clear way. Additionally, I think as a number of us would testify to, that public work really involves a number of both public and private stakeholders who also add a layer of intricacy to project implementation. So work produced for the public sector is really under great scrutiny from people who sometimes, I think we have found, don't really have an interest in the success of a project, but really have more individual interest at heart. So making sure that we produce planning documents that are really free from error can help make sure that we don't leave the door open for those individuals to raise doubts about the content as a whole. So all of these factors really came together and coalesced for our the impetus for us to move forward and develop our best practices, the challenge of orchestrating these efforts. So one of our first steps as we brought our team together was to look back at where we have been. And we're opening the doors here for a little bit. We're, as we like to be, a little bit transparent. And we looked over a broad range of our project documentation projects that occurred during 2010 and 2013. And it was quite a range of project work. A sampling is just shown here on the screen from community plans, corridor plans, design guidelines, urban design plans, and parks and recreation. And as you can see, we captured both the number of pages in the documents, the number of internal review cycles, external review cycles, the project duration, the amount of illustrations, diagrams, and metrics included in the processes, and then categorized it by what the cost would be per page if we separated that out. And what we found was that it varies quite a bit because the process for each planning project, as I'm sure most of you are aware of, really is tailored to those individual needs of clients and the community at large. But one thing that we did found, which really spurred us to want to develop some best practices, was that we found that the cost overruns in our planning document projects could reach as high as 157% of the project budget. And really that was spurred from the challenging process of actually going through the production process, not developing the content or the public outreach pieces as much as it was really managing the review cycles and really trying to manage the contract and the project duration as we had initiated in the project outset. So our goal really was to move from the don't at the bottom, where we're stuck in a continual cycle of reviewing and revising, reviewing and revising, but really being able to manage that process in a much more strategic way so that we can make sure to have quality review and before we produce the final document. Because when we're in a compressed situation where we're continually revising and reviewing and revising and reviewing, it really leaves little time for quality control, and we found it could increase the number of errors. So the purpose and intent of the best practices is really to reinsert the rigor in the process to go from just from being good to really being great in our project outcomes. So in 2014 and 2015, we have developed our standards and best practices for what we refer to as project books. Those include all the documents, document types that I described before, from academic to technical to marketing and so forth. And really trying to synthesize our practices for producing high-quality documents and making sure that all staff were trained in those processes so that we could use them as communication tools to make sure we're able to focus more on the content of these documents versus in the process. But we asked ourselves a few questions as part of this process. We asked ourselves why we conduct and document our research, and really the answer to that is that as planners and landscape architects, that this is a knowledge-based profession, and it's really important for us to have increased emphasis on performance in our industry. We found that as we have progressed throughout the years, that the projects that we have been a part of are really becoming more complex, and that the processes and teams are larger, and when the processes are longer and the teams are bigger, so the importance of being able to document our research and being able to share that across disciplines is really becoming more important every day. There's challenges, of course, with documenting and conducting research. There's challenges in terms of being able to communicate the importance of new research and being able to communicate that importance back to our clients to be able to derive new content. And then also being able to obtain the talent who both can design and research and those who want to both research and to design. And then, of course, making sure that at the end of the day that we can make sure that we're all profitable and that the outcomes are beneficial to all. And as we mentioned before, Design Workshop is really wanting to be transparent with this research. And the reason is that we feel that rising tides really do lift all boats. And a client's experience with one planner or designer really impacts our ability to influence all of the world. So we want to make sure that we're all starting from a platform of excellence so that we can move up from there. And we also like to collaborate with other planners and other disciplines, and it's really hard to do so with strict firewalls up. So being able to work collaboratively and being able to be a little bit more open, we feel really helps the profession as a whole. And in the end, we found that the secrets aren't kept anyway, so we might as well really be at the forefront of trying to spur those conversations so that we can all move forward from there. So as we begin our process of best practices, we developed a workflow diagram, which is really maintained of 5 to 6 steps, starting at scoping and proposal development, and then finishing with the delivery of the final document to the intended recipient. Those steps really were presented here in a linear fashion, but there's some, such as the content and creation and the draft production, that really are iterative and happen throughout each phase of the plan. But making sure that the upfront pieces, the scoping and the planning, are set at the beginning, and those conversations happen really in a robust and rigorous manner to be able to set the framework for success with our content creation and the production. Scoping includes the ability to anticipate the length of a document, to identify the number of review cycles, and really the conversations to talk about what's the appropriate style to write the plan or the guideline, and really trying to make sure that the scope is written to align the expectations of the client and the overall team so that we can set up for success. Document planning includes really the first steps towards creating a meaningful and compelling and quality document. At this stage, we really want to make sure we develop a strong outline and that we're sharing examples and ideas for what the document might look like in its final form. File setup and management is really about internal organization. It's an opportunity to really clearly communicate how digital files will be set up. It affects the amount of time in the end that is spent on production, final print quality, and the ease of editing and working with multiple team members. So it's a really important piece that needs to be set internally to make sure that we are organized to be able to create the content efficiently. And then the content creation and collection. Of course, it's one of the most important pieces in terms of the final outcome, but making sure that we have strategies to really cite resources and metrics, and then making sure that the content that we're delivering is in line with the deliverables and the anticipated budget. And then draft production, which is really sometimes where we get stuck in terms of the review and revision cycle. So making sure that we can manage that process well enough that we can really get back to the content creation and collection piece. And then printing and delivery, which is often sometimes an overlooked step of the process, but it's really important in terms of successfully coordinating it with the final printing and the expectation of what the final outcome will be, whether it's hard copy or digital, and how it will be accessed and used, in order to be able to ensure quality and really save time and money and effort at the end stage of the game. Today I'll really be focusing on scoping, document planning, the content creation, and draft production pieces of the process. So in terms of scoping, as I mentioned, this is really about setting and establishing the project expectations for analysis and documentation. And every project is different. We can use previous projects and efforts, looking at the number of specific tasks and hours that might be assigned to a project to help identify scope and budget. But really it must consider the project's individual needs and risks. We found that clearly defined scope is critical to the final success of a project. And if a project team is unsure of the goals, the desired outcomes, and the general scope, that there's little chance for success. So really establishing and putting the frameworks on what the process will be is really important at the outset. We found that team members can sometimes spend valuable time reworking deliverables and project plans to try and what we call pin the tail on an unseen target. So if a team understands the who, the why, the what, the where, the how much, the when of a project, then that can really create the roadmap that reveals what a successful conclusion should look like. And so those are really the questions that we want to make sure that we're asking and answering in the scoping stage. Similarly, we found that a key element of a document's quality can really be found by evaluating how at the onset those factors are really achieved in the final project, how well we're able to achieve the overall vision and those critical success factors and the metrics that were established, how well we're able to meet those in the end. So really making sure that we're measuring and testing our final outcomes. As we go through the process, we like to talk about what the final outcome might be. So in terms of being able to talk through and develop the scope, some of the questions about identifying what comparable examples or other project models are out there to help formalize the expectations is really a good tool. Sometimes, however, we found that clients really aren't aware or have little or unclear direction from upper management about what the outcome of a project should be. So in that situation, we really want to make sure to probe with a number of questions to get a sense of what the opportunities might be for what the final outcomes could be. And sometimes asking the questions of what is not desired can sometimes be a helpful tool in terms of being able to develop a range of options for what the final outcome would be. So as I mentioned, and sometimes as we develop the scope, we're able to put in a number of placeholder and assumptions for what the review cycles and the exclusions could be. But when we don't know all the information, we use it as an opportunity to continue to have those conversations throughout the process and updating and managing the process in other stages of the project, such as during the production, documentation, strategic kickoff, and other kickoff phases for different pieces of the project. So overall, our tips for identifying scope during the scoping stages, we found that these to be key elements in terms of trying to get a project on the right track at the very beginning. So identifying the available fees and what the expected budget would be, and then matching the deliverables and the schedule to that fee and budget. Determining if there's a model or a comparable project is really a helpful exercise, along with asking questions about what other projects or processes have either gone well, and then on the flip side, what hasn't gone well, so that we can try and understand what the risks are associated, so that we can develop strategies to avoid or to minimize those changes in the future. And then identifying roles and responsibilities. I think some of the key elements for those who have gone through this process before understanding who the decision makers are, how comments will be consolidated, how they'll be addressed, the number of revision cycles, and really trying to set that expectation at the very beginning. And then understanding if the final document would be basic, tailored, or custom, that again should align with the available fees and the expected budget, so that we're sort of talking apples to apples at the very beginning. And then at the end, just making sure that we capture lessons learned from each project, so that we can grow and learn from previous work as well. The next stage of our process is document planning. So thinking about setting up the framework and the platform for us to be able to develop the document, and to really ensure a cohesive process. We like to say that luck is a crossroad where preparation and opportunity meet, and I think that can definitely be found when you're developing some of our complex planning documents. Organization and really anticipating those key components are really critical to be able to produce the complex documents that we as planners develop, especially guidelines and management and master plans. So one of our first suggestions is to create a table of contents at the very outset. So this information, sorry, I flipped ahead there. This information can flow from the scope of work. It can flow from a lot of the pre-work that was done to develop the project, grant submittals, discussions with stakeholders, discussions with upper management, and then review of other previous documents, building from a table of contents. And again, this really needs to align with the final budget and expectations. And we'll talk about it a little bit more in detail as we get further into the presentation, but we like to develop a checklist that is associated with the table of contents to really organize and keep those content sections in order. And we found that it can really reduce the work necessary when it comes to putting the entire document together, that we can use this as a framework to really build success. And those tasks can be assigned to writing and producing elements of the table of contents so that it's broken down in more detail, that we understand how many images and diagrams and tables and exhibits might be associated with each piece and each chapter and each sub-chapter of the document. Another tool that we've found to be really helpful is developing a storyboard. And this is an opportunity to think about the graphic style of a document, the general layouts, the look and feel. The example that you see before you right now is from the Nevada Department of Transportation. A number of years ago, we were called upon to develop landscape and aesthetics corridor plans for every mile of highway in the state of Nevada. And it was really an unprecedented project in terms of what the final outcome would be. So one of our very first initial steps that we took was to think through how this content might be organized, what the scale of the information would be, how we might be able to organize it into different systems. And you can somewhat see the correlation between what we developed and initially thought through at the very outset of the project. Even before we went to site visits and analysis, this was developed as part of a work session conversation with the Department of Transportation, thinking about what the final outcomes would be and how the organization and the layout really are reflected from storyboard to final project book. Another lesson learned in terms of storyboarding is really being able to define what the size and the page orientation of a document should be. We've learned the lesson the hard way a number of times. I think it's getting much more commonplace for us to ask these questions at the very beginning, and it might seem pretty simple, but making sure that we know, is it going to be an 8.5 by 11 vertical document, or will it be like the one that you see here, an 11 by 17 landscape document? That size and orientation really can have a lasting effect in the final stages. We've had experiences where clients have asked us to change from letter to tabloid and to rotate the project book from portrait to landscape after submitting the first draft, and which requires you to rescale every exhibit, fit new exhibits to the page size and orientation, and it can be incredibly time consuming. So really understanding and asking those questions at the outset may seem simple, but making sure that you're on the same page is really critical in order to make sure that we are, again, able to focus on the content and not as much reworking production tasks. Another tool that we found to be incredibly helpful is a style guide. For us, we have built a custom style guide for design workshop, which we present at the beginning of every project, and it's tailored to that project. But the foundation for the style guide is from the Associated Press style book. We talk about grammar, we talk about punctuation, we talk about naming conventions, capitalizations, how we might reference specific items that are specific to a project. Commas, for example, we had a project where it would have helped us in the long run had we developed the style guide early to understand that the client did not want a comma before the and, or did want the comma before the and in a compound sentence, or if you wanted one space after a period, or whether there are two spaces. Some things we seem to think that could be easy find and replace items, but if we're thinking in planning and all on the same page at the very beginning about how we refer to items, we have found that it can really be helpful in the long term. And the intent is really to set up consistency, and again to really streamline some of the quality management review processes as we understand and aren't looking for those inconsistencies, which can really be red flags to some people as they review work. And we actually found this to be a really helpful tool recently in a connectivity plan that we developed, that we were able to work with a client and presented the style guide, and one of the first comments back was that we found out that they were undergoing a number of division and name changes, so that we were able to pick those up early on in the process versus going back and having to rework all of that content later on. As I mentioned, in terms of working with the table of contents, really understanding and developing some of the detail behind that. So as part of a strategic kickoff with each project book or document planning process, we really want to make sure that all of the documents, ingredients, all the content that will be developed for the document is organized from start to finish, and that those high-level decisions for the document are made and shared with the entire team, so that we get buy-off from the upper management or the clients about what the table of contents would be. We get buy-off on the layout. We get buy-off on what type of software will be used, especially with some agencies. It's important to understand if they want to have a working file that is Microsoft Word versus most of our documents are developed in a publishing software program such as InDesign, which knowing that up front is really important in terms of understanding how illustrative our document could be. And then also understanding that changes may occur throughout the process, and some of these pieces might change, but we use this as a communication tool to be able to bring it back to the client and understand that where things are changing and how we might be able to address those changes down the road. So overall, our best practices for document planning, which is really setting up the project so that we can focus on the content development, is are determining whether the document is academic, technical, or visioning, or marketing in nature, and what the audience would be. So that really helps us understand what style of writing is needed and who will be reading this document in the end. And then also understanding if it's going to be adopted by City Council or another governing body. As we all know, that factors into scheduling and review periods and how we might address some comments. So understanding how it will be adopted and used in the final outcomes is really important. Determining what the content or the table of contents would be, who is going to be developing some of that content, where it might be coming from, and whether we might be using either stock graphics or custom graphics is also a really key point. And this also, again, goes to the budget issue. So this can be something if a project is really needs to be streamlined, we might move towards the stock graphics versus custom. Understanding what the production and review schedule will be, determining how subsequent copies are printed, and that can influence the size and orientation of a document and whether a document is full bleed or not, and understanding the capacity and the capabilities of being able to print. Or if the document is really intended to live digitally and for download, and how links and other technological advances might be incorporated into the document from the outset. And then again, really trying to review and confirm all aspects of the production at the strategic kickoff, as shown in the last spreadsheet. So our next step that we developed through the process is include file setup and management and content creation and collection. As I mentioned, I won't dwell a lot on file setup and management, other than to say that it's really important to stay organized. So making sure that all staff are work from and understand what the folder structure is within your organization, and then to really be clear on file naming conventions so that as staff come and go and as new people work on a project, that we're able to find files, we're able to work with them easily, and it really can result in a much smoother workflow. So just making sure that we're setting ourselves up for success in that way as well. Content creation for design workshop, we really start in Word and Excel for our narrative text and a lot of our exhibits, and then place that information into a desktop publishing software. But we really want to make sure that we have that opportunity to revise the narrative text at least once, if not twice, before placing it into a publishing document, because the tools that are available in programs such as Microsoft Word are much more robust in terms of making sure that we're getting our grammar and our editing and style pieces down at the very beginning. And then again, making sure that all of the content that is developed, whether it be illustrations, renderings, photography, that we're reviewing it and that we're making those revisions prior to dropping it into our final document. And a project that we recently worked through, which used this process, was the State Route 28 Corridor Management Plan. I'm in the Lake Tahoe office of Design Workshop, and this project was along the east shore of Lake Tahoe, which is has the longest stretch of public beach access, but with that recreation demand is actually double what the existing parking capacity is. So they've had dealt with a number of really complex issues that cross jurisdictional boundaries over the years, with about 2,000 people per day at peak average having to walk in travel lanes along this 2-lane highway to be able to reach their recreation demand or destinations, because there wasn't enough parking nor physical ability to be able to put parking. So thinking about how transit, how capacity and coordinated efforts could be put in place to be able to help address some of these issues was really one of the key pieces. But as I mentioned, the project itself had been, the area had been planned for a number of years. So one of our first tasks in terms of thinking about how we would put together the corridor management plan to be a little bit more comprehensive and living in nature was to do a review and a gap analysis of those existing documents. So looking through and really analyzing what projects and recommendations have been made throughout these 16+ documents, and understanding what had been completed, what still needed to be completed, what elements were no longer relevant, and then understanding where there were gaps in information where we needed to focus and draw new data, which really helped us in terms of content creation, where we were able to really focus our efforts on those data gaps instead of recreating existing data. The project also had its challenges in terms of the number of stakeholders and jurisdictional agencies that were involved. We had 13 different agencies, including that cross jurisdictional boundaries, from Forest Service to state parks to the county of Washoe County, Douglas County, Carson City County, and a number of different transportation agencies, all trying to come together and really develop a really collaborative process to address the issues. So, and this really just added to the complexity and the decision-making and editing and review process. So it was really key for us to be able to work through with all of the stakeholders, the ability for them to review documents, to have time within their agencies to be able to do thorough reviews and to get comments back, and being able to have a process set forth that clearly was able to address some of the concerns that were brought up. And as designers and planners, we really are called upon to look at a wide variety of data and really be able to capture and depict and describe that data in a very concise manner. For the corridor management plan, it was really about understanding a lot of the use and travel patterns and some of the capacity studies. And we developed a number of analysis metrics to guide the recommendations. And our challenge is really about consolidating and synthesizing that data. And some of the tools that we used, which we've recommended in our best practices, are the progress tracking and using assigned roles, And then also the table of contents checklist, which I referred to previously. So really delving into all the components that we've identified as part of our table of contents, identifying when it will be ready internally, who will be responsible for it, when it will be ready for external review, and when that final draft will be produced. So being able to, as we work along, pull each of these pieces together and then get buy-off and review on each individual section so that we can see what sections still need to be developed and then understand also what has been completed. And with the 28 project, we were able to identify throughout the process and looking at the table of contents and all the pieces that would be added to the project, where some of the existing content sources would be, and then some of the pieces that would need to be developed and some of the new content sources that would need to be identified and studied. So really, we have found that when we use these checklists, that it's a lot more than being automatons. If anyone has read the book Checklist Manifesto, it's a great recommendation in terms of the importance of checklists, that they're not just things to be checking off and must-dos, but they can really be tools to help us think a little bit more creatively, that it allows and frees us to think about the higher level issues a little bit more. And we've also found that these tools really allow us to be rigorous in our documentation and the creation of content throughout each phase. We found that there's really great value in being able to write content and deliver chapters as the project progresses. When we postpone creating content until the very end, we found that it really puts the entire process at risk. Number one, the client or the upper management really hasn't been able to see anything regarding writing style or the type of content or graphics, and being able to, and pushing all those conversations to the end of a project can really put you at risk for having to rewrite and redevelop a lot of the content. I recently was pulled into a project to develop a tourism management plan where all the content had been previously developed, but it hadn't been assimilated or coalesced in any kind of manner. So the challenge of being able to take a number of disparate sources and then trying to put them into one coherent voice, and also being able to do summaries and organization that really helps with the flow of the document can be challenging at the end. And we've really found that being able to think at the upfront about how things will fit in and what the process and the story will be as you develop the overall document really needs to be part of the discussion at the very beginning. When we don't face those tough conversations, as I mentioned, we really run the risk of major rework, which in turn really is one of the major sources that we think about for cost overruns and for schedule delays. So really making sure that each time that you provide a deliverable to a client, that we're also providing them the table of contents checklist so that they can see, again, what has been approved, what has been developed, and what other pieces of the puzzle are still outstanding. So overall, our best practices for analysis capture can be seen here. And first and foremost is making sure that everyone uses the style guide. I think we can't say that enough for the projects that we found, especially when you have a number of consultants or sub-consultants, making sure that we're all on the same page about the style of writing and about some of those details in terms of grammar and how things are referred to really can save a lot of time in the later stages of a project, so that you can really, again, focus on the content. And then drafting content as it is created, as I mentioned. You create narratives that describe the underlying theme as we go along, and beginning drafting the preliminary implementation recommendations as they arise really can help when you're in the final stages of creating alternatives for a project. We found that project teams sometimes grapple with issues or needs, and being able to formulate those recommendations along the way and really trying to answer those key questions such as who, when, how, why and how much. As we're developing this along the way, it really sets us up for success in the end. And that making sure that we build the content in alignment with the table of contents. So really those things as part of a project document, sometimes we develop a table of contents and don't look at it until we're ready for production, but the more that we can keep that in front of the team so that we can understand how all the pieces are being shaped together allows us to, again, make sure that we're developing the content appropriately, but also that we're maintaining alignment with the expectations of the project, that we're not just developing content for the sake of developing content, that it will add to the final outcome and the measurability of the project. And then documenting all of our metrics and research methodology. This is especially important when we're developing maps or utilizing tools and conducting studies, making sure that we're really being clear about some of our methodologies and documenting those along the way. And that also goes hand in hand with public outreach. Sometimes we push on forward to the next phase of public outreach without clearly organizing and summarizing the process and the outcomes as we go along, which can lead to a lot of rework at the end. And then the ability to really synthesize and manage large quantities of information. And some of the tools and suggestions that we've developed is to develop the content and then narrow it. Making sure to use opportunities to discuss the content so that we can really synthesize those key issues and findings and metrics, and debriefing and really discussing those elements can help us identify what pieces of the content should live in the body of the document, and then what should actually be moved to the appendix. And that can also help keep the project on budget and on schedule. And then also establishing a hierarchy to keep readers' attention. So not putting too much of the bulk of meat of a document into the project, the heart of the project book, but understanding what should be put in the appendix. Really, we found that a rule of thumb could be that if the guidelines, if it can't be paraphrased in 1 or 2 paragraphs, that really it might be best off put into the appendix to ensure that really the readability of the document and the flow of the final document is really really heightened. So understanding what we should dwell on within the body of the document versus what should go to the appendix. And then making sure that we cite as we write. Standards, benchmarks, regulations, plans, those should all be cited, and being as transparent and accurate as possible. There's nothing worse than having a number of references within a document that haven't been cited appropriately. So making sure that as we write that we're documenting that. And then important, making sure that we recognize copyrights as well, that we're giving credit to those who deserve credit where needed within a document. And for those of you who don't know, I think Microsoft Word has some great tools in terms of being able to do citations. So that might be a tool to be able to look and explore a little bit. They have a built-in reference tab that you can cite sources, and that can actually keep those citations so that you can use them in future projects as well, so you don't have to continually generate them. So a tool that you might be able to use. And then again, reiterating the checklist, we're really trying to harness the power so that we can really, again, keep everyone on the same page, that it can be used as a communication tool both internally and externally to keep us focused on what the content needs to be and where we are in the process. And finally, reviewing and editing. Review cycles, I think, can be where a lot of us get caught up. And as you see, we sort of identify the desirable process for reviewing and editing, where at the 20% stage, we're reviewing text and exhibits in separate files, so it might not be laid out, but you'd be reviewing text in more of a Word format. And then as we move forward through the process, you see them in a document layout and then final review. And really the intent is that the review is continually more focused, that we're thinking about the big ideas first, and then as we get further into final delivery, delivery, that's when we're focused on a lot more of the detail pieces. And draft production really is a complex process, and so making sure that we don't lead to endless review is really our goal as part of this piece. And there's a number of ways that we found that you can gather comments, and again, this should be discussed at the very project outset. For us, we found that it's really beneficial to initiate reviews and comments using Microsoft Word and then track changes during the early stages of a project. And then as we move into more of a document layout, that those comments come through Adobe PDF. But again, this really needs to be a conversation that happens early to understand when text might move into being formatted and when comments would be received in a digital form on a PDF versus in track changes in Word, because moving back and forth can be challenging. And there's also other online programs that could be used for shareware and to track comments, such as Microsoft OneDrive, Google Docs, and there's others too that people may be familiar with to be able to use, but really having that conversation and understanding how the comments will be generated, how they will be addressed, and who would be the final decision maker on those is really important. And there's times too that we might have hard copy reviews. This occurs a lot internally when we produce a draft and it's reviewed, and we found that it's really helpful. Some of these might be a little bit of a flashback, but really helping people get on the same page about what those proofreaders' marks are and what they mean, so that we can quickly and easily be able to edit and to pick up those edits. As we become a little bit more familiar with them again, we've found that they can really become second nature to both the reviewer and to the project team. And then one of our key tools that we have developed for managing the review process is really the comments log. For us, it includes the dates that the comment was given, the document itself, who gave the comments, and then the comment itself. But some of the really important piece is the resolution and the call to action. So how are we going to address the comment that was given? And then double checking and making sure, did it get done? That helps a lot with the quality control and the quality management, but it also helps communicate back both to stakeholders, to clients, to the public about how those comments were considered and how we might be able to communicate at a broader scale how we were able to address those comments. And some of the important pieces here, again, really are understanding who will consolidate the comments. Oftentimes, we receive all the comments and then we transfer them, which we can export out through PDF or through Microsoft Word, export them to a spreadsheet and then copy paste and organize it into our comment log. But sometimes there's conflicting comments, so understanding and having set up at the very beginning who will be the final decision maker on some of those conflicting comments, and really where there might be clarification needed on how to resolve some of the questions. So having those conversations is really, really important. And then making sure that we capture all the information so that as comments and questions arise through later phases that we're able to refer back. And we found the comment log really to be very helpful in terms of both managing change for the client team and then internally as well. If staff internally change, we're able to go back and understand where the comments are coming from and how we might be able to address them. And then thinking a little bit more high level than just one specific comment, but if there's a trend of a type of comment, making sure that we're thinking about how that might be addressed through organization and overall content development. And our Urban Houston Framework project was a really good example of using the comment log to really track and respond to comments. It really facilitated client communication and helped really foster the resolution to comments prior to making the changes in the project book or in the document itself. Sometimes we get caught up into a loop of getting a comment, making a change, revising the document, and sending it right back out. But if we're not thinking about it a little bit more strategically, we can get ourselves into a little bit of a loop where we're not thinking at a little bit higher level about how we can improve the content as a whole. So our best practices for review and editing really are about the conversational pieces, confirming who reviews, what's the purpose of the review, if they're not supposed to be focused on grammar and that fine detail, making sure that we're getting comments on some of the higher level pieces, understanding how the comments would be consolidated, and then also documenting decisions. This can be done with the comment log, but also recommended also to think about a decision log. That's a separate summary of when decisions are made throughout the process, that we're documenting those, that we're all on the same page about how we're moving forward throughout the process. And then understanding that throughout processes and projects, sometimes projects last multiple years, and that things change throughout time. So we can set up the project as well as we can at the onset, but then making sure that we're reviewing the scope with our teams internally and then also externally, and that we're coordinating that back with the checklist, so that we're understanding whether we're on track or whether we need to have some kind of adjustments. And then providing solutions when there's out-of-scope items or scope creep, as the term goes, which is that incremental expansion of project scope. But really being able to identify and talk through solutions to potentially adjust the contract, which might not be an additional fee, but really thinking about other pieces that we might be able to adjust to modify and really respond to some new information. And always be forward-thinking, looking ahead to what the next deliverable is, and adding that to the conversation piece as part of our regular dialogue. Utilizing the weekly to-do list and, again, the decision log, identifying what decisions have been made. And those can really be helpful when there are changes in the decision-making team. And making sure that we speak when there are changes in the decision-making team, that we immediately bring those people up to speed as part of what decisions have been made and what the process that we've identified is going to be. And then finally, writing is only as good as the source that it comes from. So we really try to make sure that we provide resources for people to grow those skills. And so these are just a sampling of some of the writing resources that we have found to be helpful for people as they think through professional editing and writing, so that we can make sure that our content is being developed as clearly and concisely as possible. So I believe I'm out of time, but I wanted to thank you for all of your time and the opportunity to share some of the best practices that we've developed over the years, and really are able to answer questions and perhaps also learn from some of the best practices and lessons learned that you've had. With that, I'll turn it back to Christine.
Great. Thanks. Okay, let's see. So, Stephanie, we have a lot of questions for you, so I'm just going to start running through them. So I apologize if it gets a little tedious for you, but this is a really interesting topic. Okay, so I need you to think way back into the beginning of the presentation and one of your first slides. Can you discuss why the complexity of projects and related documents has grown? You had made a comment in one of your beginning slides about that.
You know, for us, I think it has grown both because of the interest I think that people are having in planning and recognizing the importance that these documents have in shaping their communities. So more and more people are becoming involved as part of the stakeholder and public outreach process. There's a lot more information out there that we're trying to consolidate and trying to respond to. So I think these processes end up being very broad in their content text and the amount of people that are engaged with to be part of it. So being able to take that information and really try and synthesize it into something that is meaningful has become really a rigorous process over the years. And then the second part of that would be, for us, I think the multidisciplinary aspect. It's hard for me to think of a project in the last 3 years where we haven't worked with a team of ologists or scientists in some way or another, a specialist for different project aspects, and being able to relate that back to public goals in a very meaningful way, I think has added to some of the complexity.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Are you using more data visualization and infographics in your reports? And if so, do they increase your production time? If not, has there been a call for more visuals and less text?
You know, we do use a lot of visuals in our documents. A lot of that is really trying to express some of the metrics. We found that the visuals and being able to have infographics as part of our documentation really helps bring it to life. And a lot of people, it's you know, how people learn and how people take in information. Some people prefer to read it, and some people prefer to see it visually. And the ability to illustrate a number of key elements in an illustration or a graphic can sometimes really pare down the amount of words that are needed to explain a concept. I think that it does add to the budget at times, but we've also been able to develop a suite of tools and sort of cross-share them throughout the firm so that we can spend a little bit less time remaking the will or recreating the will, and really trying to focus on again, elements that might need to be developed and synthesized for that project specifically. So although we've seen a rise, I think, in the need for data visualization, I think we've also developed our own sort of internal styles and databases to help us also offset that increase.
Okay, next question. Is there an option in your design process to produce reports as websites instead of books created in InDesign?
That's an interesting thought. We have not developed the final document as a website, but we have developed websites as part of the process, and bringing people along. It's part of the community engagement piece, and that's an interesting concept about how the information would be organized and accessed potentially differently if it was primarily website generated. So very, very interesting thought. We definitely have used websites as part of the communication tool, but not as the sole output of a project.
Okay, and so I know that you've talked about InDesign, but is there any other publishing software that you use for design guidelines?
You know, we use the Adobe Suite quite extensively. So there's Adobe Bridge, there's Adobe Illustrator. Typically the word processing piece, the publishing piece, is in InDesign. So it's sort of like taking a lot of Legos and then consolidating them together. So the final software that would be used would be InDesign, but that might include maps that were generated from ArcMap. It might include maps that were generated from Illustrator, or diagrams that were developed from Illustrator, or illustrations that were developed through SketchUp modeling and photo rendering software. So really a collaborative, a number of different programs that we develop some of the content pieces in that then are placed within the InDesign file. I think some of the other programs that are out there are Quark Express, but we found great success with InDesign, so that's somewhat the standard that we've been using.
Okay, thank you. Your photos, where did you get them? Did you take them yourself? Was it a city or a client? Who provides you with these photos?
And a lot of our photos are internal, so we do have a professional photographer who photographs our own projects along with some stock photography. And then we also have a source of imagery online internally that we access. So staff, if they are out and about and find great examples of things, they're encouraged to take high resolution images of it and to upload it onto our internal site so that we can all have access to it. I've also been involved with projects where the client has another photographer to go out and take pictures for that project. There are sites that you can buy imagery from, but and then we've also had instances where we've obtained copyright or permission to use certain images from other people. So really being aware of what the copyright laws are is really important, I think, in this day and age, understanding who owns the credits and making sure that we're crediting those images appropriately. But so we have used a variety of sources, I guess would be the final answer on that, but we do have in-house photography as well.
Okay, thank you. Have you developed a guideline for the % of overall budget that document production should be? You know, we talk about Adobe Suite and all we see are dollar signs. Do you have any rules of thumb that you can provide based on document type or client expectations, things like that?
You know, we really tried to, that was where the dollar per page came out of on the slides that I showed. We really tried to think through if we could get down to that level of detail on our post-mortem analysis, if we could identify that an urban design plan project would be, you know, $1,000 per page and would be potentially X amount of pages. We found that the total cost really varied so much that it was hard for us to get down to that sort of rule of thumb about the overall % of the budget. And part of that, I think, is really that it's so process driven that there's quite a bit more that goes into a project other than just the production. The community outreach and engagement can be a substantial amount of the final fee, which if you were just looking at an overall project budget would raise that substantially for the amount of cost per page. So we haven't gotten to a % of overall budget, but I can imagine that that would be something that we might be looking at next.
Okay, thank you. A lot of folks are asking this, so I'm just going to ask now. Are your design guidelines available as a document or to download?
You know, not currently. We don't have them available currently. We do have some of the tools, some of the comment logs and some of the other tools that I've shown that have been shared in different forums that are available for people to look at. But we haven't put the best practices document as a whole up, but we are looking at potentially doing that in the future or publishing it in the future to share it with folks a little bit more broadly.
Okay, great. As you complete each stage of the document, how do you avoid a council or board from revisiting the parts that everyone had previously agreed upon?
Oh, the challenge of challenges.
Right? I know.
Yeah, and that goes with some of the decision log and the comment log, and it really is about just trying to make sure that we're documenting where we are. And we like to refer to it as a communication tool, I think. So yes, we can revisit, and that if someone wants to revisit, we can, but I think it's about communicating what that could do to the overall schedule, to the budget, and it really is about assessing and balancing that, having that conversation so that we can decide, is it really important for us to start over? How far do we need to start over? If we do rewrite a section, does it have implications for future sections? I think that's the beauty of the tools that we've created is that it allows us to have that conversation where we're all on the same page and that we can all make those decisions together. Because sometimes there might be new information that really has come to surface, and it really does justify rethinking some of the previous elements. Or I think most likely it's really about trying to manage up and keep people aware of where we are on the process. And so in terms of sort of discussing and bringing that back up to City Council and to the planning governing board's view, it's really it really brings to bear the importance of managing up, is the term I'll use, making sure that there's touchstones along the way, that they understand what has been developed, where we're headed, and that it's not something new at the very end or close to the end of the process, that they are aware of the process as we move along, so that we can determine the need to change together and be on the same page with that.
Okay, thank you. I think I know the answer to this, but we'll ask. In your experience, have you found that public sector clients' budgets are in alignment with their expectations, or do you find that the budget and the expectations are not in line?
It has varied, actually. There's definitely, I think, especially throughout the last, after the recession, I think there was a definite push to keep budgets as lean and mean as possible. And sometimes I think we see things that have been developed and don't really realize the level of effort that it took to get there. And in that case, the budgets for the public sector can be out of alignment. But then I've also had worked with public sector clients that really are aware of all the elements that are required and all the effort that is required to do really great work and set some of the complexity of projects and to really address those and then understand that sometimes what the amount of funds that are available might not be adequate to really address the problem that's at hand. So I think it's a little bit back and forth, and I think the more that we can share what the efforts, what it takes actually to get some of the work done, the more we can actually be in alignment with really trying to make sure that our budgets and our expectations are at par with one another.
Okay, thanks. How might the processes that you've been discussing be abbreviated for small government divisions doing much of the work internally? Do they still need comment log?
I would suggest a comment log. I think everything is scalable. We work on a number of large projects, but we also have quite a few very lean and mean projects as well. So again, it's really about having that conversation at the beginning and trying to document it through. But I think the more that you can set yourself up to be organized, the better off you will be at the end. So I think there are opportunities for some of the smaller agencies and in-house production to be able to use some of the tools to really frame the setup. The more that you can look through and develop comparable projects and some of the precedent projects, you get yourself started on the right step for developing the table of contents. And from there, it's really about the organization and who's developing what. But the comment log, I would say, I have found it to be one of the most helpful pieces in terms of being able to communicate back to upper management about how their comments are being addressed. And it really helps with community outreach too.
Okay, thanks. It appears that some of the suggested protocols are needed because a lot of people are working on the same project. Would an alternative simply be to reduce the number of people who are working on the project?
You know, you could reduce the number of people working on the project, but that doesn't preclude the fact that there might be change. So if you have I think that goes to the scalability of it as well. If it was a smaller project that could be done by a smaller team, then that might be an appropriate suggestion. But you have to think if that person might leave, if it's one person doing all the work, and how the work is being documented, so that someone doesn't have to start over if there's a change in the project team or the number of people that are needed. So I think it's definitely scalable and thinking about reducing the number of project team members, but I think you also have to balance if you need some other project team members for some of the contents and the quality of information that they might be providing. So just making sure that it's balanced as part of thinking about the final project expectations and the final outcomes.
To circle back and echo your comments regarding the comment log, someone just typed in, on a federal project, we term the documentation defense in depth for all decisions made. This required meticulous documentation of the meetings, decisions, changes, and comment resolution, always a good practice to ensure everyone is legally and otherwise protected. So I wanted to mention that. The next question, I often prepare a variety of planning documents for clients and client cities. While they are technical and graphic in nature, the local community has some trouble understanding what's in the narratives and graphics in the document. Do you have any suggestions in simplifying text and graphics so that the community can understand what's in these documents?
You know, it's hard without seeing the graphics themselves, because oftentimes we use the graphics to help explain and simplify the text. Some of the other tools that we've used in terms of organizing the information is, as I mentioned, trying to get as much of the technical pieces into the appendix as we can, or also using callouts and summaries and sidebars, so that it doesn't require someone to read a 200-page document, but they're able to sort of skim and read through and just sort of read the highlight bars and see some associated illustrations and imagery that help to communicate that idea. And again, I think going back to one of the previous questions for visualizations, I think the more that we're able to really clearly communicate and graphically communicate things with real life examples, the more people are able to associate and a little bit more understand some of the concepts that are being shared. I think the challenge there is sometimes it's hard to find great examples that are great in all ways. So sometimes we find an image that might have one piece of our design guideline illustrated or be a great example, but might not be a great example in another vein. So being able to develop your imagery database that really hits all the marks is really important, because I think people can focus on the negatives really quickly regarding imagery and graphics. So those are some of the tools that we've used, really trying to move a lot of the technical pieces, if we can't summarize it really concisely, that it's moved to the appendix, and again, really trying to use visualizations as much as possible.
Okay, I think this is going to be our last question. Do you develop the table of contents at an early stage of the project, after setting the vision, let's say, to help guide the overall work content and products, or does the table of contents sort of move along as the project moves along?
We do try to do the first. So we try to develop it early, so it guides the development of the content and it guides the process. But as I mentioned, sometimes it is a little bit fluid, that you might learn something along the way that might influence the table of contents back and forth a little bit. But you set the initial sort of first blush about what you think that table of contents will include and what's going to be developed to fill in that content. And if you need to work back and modify it as the project moves forward, it's just that conversation between all parties to make sure you understand why you're changing it and how the information might be reorganized to respond to some new information. But really trying to set it early along with the vision stage to really shape the development of the content.
Okay, I lied about it being the last question because one more just came through, and it's a really interesting one, so I want to ask. Have you ever collaborated with a cartoonist or comic book writer to make the document more readily understandable? I know I've been to conferences or workshops, things like that, where an artist will be there and will be drawing live, sort of interpreting what's going on. I find that really effective. Have you ever done anything like this, or?
We have worked with live illustrators before.
Right,
I
yeah.
haven't worked with a cartoonist per se, which sounds really fun. So I'm thinking about how I can do that in the future. But we have worked with live illustrators who are amazing, and in terms of being able to really graphically show ideas in real time. Where we have visioning sessions. One day we work overnight, and he has amazing illustrations to show those concepts the next day, and people can really get excited about seeing some of their ideas come to life. So I agree, very, very effective tool, being able to collaborate and work with artists, and I'm interested in the cartoonist because that's an interesting aspect that we might be able
Google
to
that.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, Stephanie Grigsby, thank you for joining us today, and thank you to the Urban Design and Preservation Division for sponsoring today's webcast. So everyone, have a great day. Have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to some of you maybe on Friday. And thanks. We'll talk next time.
Thank you.